Okay.
Oh, but he's not on this panel. I
Okay.
originally thought he was.
I think he was originally on the panel.
Gave him
Okay.
the kickoff.
Perfect. Perfect.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay. He's probably excited about that.
Yeah.
He's the reason we're running late.
Is that right?
Oh yeah, he had 7 minutes. He went on for 20.
So is your question, what's the foundation doing around economic development in
Yeah,
Cleveland?
we'll leave with that one first.
Hi, good morning. We're going to start again. If we could get everyone in our seats. Thanks. So we have a really interesting panel coming up. You've all heard the great news about cities and the Renaissance. Cleveland itself has experienced a renaissance. We've had 20% population growth in downtown since 2000. We have about 30% of our population has four-year degrees. But we have to make sure that our urban residents also have access to opportunities. And we have to come up with strategies so that we have a thriving and successful urban population. I think Boz said it best, that a digitization of your community starts with community. And today we have an esteemed panel that's going to be talking to you about those kind of strategies and give real concrete examples of how we can train people for 21st century jobs. We can turn those jobs into careers, and we can get people to the jobs with creative transit. So today we have Matt Zone, Councilman Matt Zone, who will be our moderator. We have Ron Richard, who is president and CEO of the Cleveland Foundation. We have Natoya Walker-Minor, who is Chief of Public Affairs for the City of Cleveland. And we have Jason Segedy, who is Assistant to the Mayor and has been a long time in planning in the City of Akron. Welcome.
So good morning. Welcome to Cleveland. My name is Matt Zone, and not only am I fortunate to serve as a longtime council member here in the city of Cleveland, I also presently serve as the president of the National League of Cities. It's an organization that represents about approximately 120,000 mayors and council members in the United States. And during my tenure, I've spent a lot of time on the topic that we're about to tackle. So now more than ever, the economic well-being of our families is at risk. And we as local officials, NGOs, foundations, academia, corporations, we can be the key instrument for change for people who live in our country. And I think this panel, there was a couple of good panels that kind of built up the topics that we're going to delve into. You know, our organization, we're engaging thousands of municipal leaders a year and educating mayors and council members on how they can be the key champions for this work. And we've really prioritized racial equity as a key lens frame of reference through which we view our work on a broad range of areas, including economic development, housing and health, resilience, sustainability, and the well-being of children, youth, and families. You know, these issues are so important to me. That's why in this year I formed the Economic Mobility and Opportunity Task Force, because even though cities have rebounded and are as prosperous as we've ever been, there are still populations that are being seriously left behind. And how are we as leaders in our respective sectors being intentional to make sure that nobody is left behind? So one of the goals of our task force is we're going to issue a white paper. It'll come out next month with key recommendations on how cities can address economic barriers that are keeping families from sharing in our country's prosperity. So let's start out by defining economic mobility and economic opportunities. Economic mobility is the ability of individuals and families to move up the income ladder, which is fundamental value that defines the American dream. And economic opportunities enables individuals and families to become economically mobile, such as jobs, training, and support. And so let's look at the American dream. If we define economic mobility as the probability that a child born to parents in the bottom fifth, that's the bottom fifth of income distribution reaches the top fifth in the United States, we fare pretty bad. Funny enough, the chances of achieving the American dream is almost twice as higher in Canada than it is in the United States. So let's jump into our conversation. Ron, I'm going to come to you first. Ron is the president and CEO of the oldest foundation in America, the Cleveland Foundation. What is the foundation doing around economic development in the city of Cleveland?
Yeah, I think the short answer to that is everything you could possibly think of and more. We are probably the first place-based philanthropy in the country to really get into economic development. Traditionally, foundations did arts and culture, social services and whatnot, but our board decided probably 20 years ago that we really had to focus on economic development. And I think we started out saying, how can we retain all these brilliant folks that are graduating from Case Western Reserve University and our other fine universities? And we started funding a series of economic development intermediaries. And they were like Jumpstart, BioEnterprise, Nortec, Team Neo. And I think they've all been very, very successful at helping new startup companies in biotech and outside of biotech and in IT, et cetera. But we, several years ago, we had an outside evaluator come in and look at our work in economic development. And what they said was, everything you've done has been great, it's had a great ROI, but the core city low-income residents have been left behind. You really should shift your emphasis into the core city, and so we've done that. So in addition to still funding all those economic intermediaries, which are important, they create jobs and tax base and wealth, we've also really focused in on every aspect of workforce development. So for example, we've started a series of for-profit employee-owned companies, the Evergreen Companies, a huge commercial laundry, greenhouse, solar company, to employ folks that had a difficult work history, including a lot of people who came back from prison. And so we've got these companies. We've been working closely with the city and the county in every aspect of workforce. We've really helped to revitalize the school system, the Cleveland Plan, which we really helped to author. And that's where you want to start, right, with kids as young as possible. Recently, under the leadership of our Chief Technology Officer, Leon Wilson, we're trying to make sure that every kid in Cleveland Public Schools has an IT education at a pretty early stage. So I could talk for a very long time, but my time is extremely limited. So I'll stop there. But we are doing everything you could think of in terms of the workforce and funding the various colleges and working with our anchor institution, hospital, and university partners to help create jobs.
Well, in a little bit, we're going to get a little deeper into some of the work of the foundation, and we thank you for being such a champion for not only Cleveland, but our region. Natoya Walker-Minor is the Chief of Public Affairs for the City of Cleveland. And Natoya, what are some of the place-based strategies that the City of Cleveland has embraced to lift families with the goal of improving their economic status and to provide a transferable skill?
Sure, and thank you for that question. I want to pick up on what Ron said as I go into my answer. And literally, the March on Washington that Dr. King had 54 years ago was a march on economic prosperity. How does one climb the social ladder? How do you change the conditions of people from a socioeconomic place? And in the city of Cleveland over the last 12 years under leadership of Mayor Jackson, working very closely with public and private and philanthropy, we have focused on ban the box. We ban the box inside the city of Cleveland so that we can give those that were returning citizens an opportunity for employment. Why is that important? So that they can take care of their families, so that they can have housing, so that they can have access to an education to change their conditions. For 5 years, Mayor Jackson himself spearheaded community benefit agreements, and that was a multifaceted partnership of 14 people, really 14 types of organizations, corporations, foundations, the unions, nonprofits, academia, to say, how do we, on development projects, make sure that it's development for all? So the previous conversation, the previous speaker from St. Paul, when she talked about developers love value and people love water, but people love opportunity. And so I loved seeing that slide and that example that she had. That's what we're doing with our major developments. So we did it with university hospitals, with their Vision 2010 partnership. The foundation was a part of that. We did it with our
So
casino.
in the university hospital, this is a $1 billion initiative that the hospital was building.
Yes.
Expand upon that a little bit.
Touching on the anchor institution, and I believe it was the foundation for knowing that we could have anchor institutions doing place-based strategies here in Cleveland. And university hospitals had I believe it was a $2.7 billion project. They had 5 projects going on at the same time. And what they did was they embraced City of Cleveland ordinances around minority female business inclusion at 30%, resident-based employment on the job, and pre-apprentice employment on the job, so that when the job was over, those businesses would have experience, access, and partnership through informal mentor protege type programs. We have also inside the City of Cleveland, we are celebrating our 14th year of the Cleveland Resident Employment Law, something that Mayor Jackson did when he was City Council President as a way to engage residents on construction jobs. So with that, for every public improvement contract greater than $100,000, 20% of the construction worker hours have to be set aside for Cleveland residents to engage in that. It is a modified version of Section 3 that came out of 1965, the war on poverty at the federal level inside of HUD, but we have it at the local level to touch on economic opportunities, workforce development, and really tapping into pre-apprentice. And those are place-based strategies. Place-based strategies are the answer. It is the way to change the conditions of the people in and around a community and to thrive with corporate, public, private, so that communities are healthier and we build the social fabric of our communities.
So another example, again, how government is being intentional, working with foundations, working with corporations, nonprofits to really build equity for our most vulnerable populations. I'm really excited to have Jason Segedy on our panel. Jason's the director of Planning and Urban Development in the city of Akron. One of the things I love about Northeastern Ohio is that we understand it's really regions, not cities, if we're going to compete on a global scale. And Jason has been a real thought leader on this issue for many years. So Jason, Mayor Horgan has stated that he refuses to manage his own decline, but instead is actively pursuing strategies to grow Akron's population and middle class. How do you feel that this is the right approach for your city?
It's a great question, and I appreciate the opportunity to come up to our neighbor to the north and talk about this and to talk to all of you from around the globe. Mayor Horgan has thought really hard about this issue of, in a lot of cities, whether you call them legacy cities, Rust Belt cities, whatever your term of art is, there's been a lot of buzz and talk about smart decline. And I think our argument is, well, smart decline is better than dumb decline. Trying not to decline is even better than either of those. And so, and why we feel that's important, City of Akron's lost about 1/3 of its population since its 1960 peak of 290,000 people. We're at about 198,000 people. It's been kind of a slow trickle over those 57 years. We've weathered the storm maybe a little bit better than some of our peer cities in the region have, but the chinks in our armor were starting to crack. We were losing a lot of housing. The city of Akron tears down 500 houses every year. That's about 2 per business day if you're keeping track at home. And what we really need to do is restore the middle class in the city. Mayor Horgan's been very intentional about gathering data to look at what's gone on in the city's housing stock. We did a pretty instrumental report, Planning to Grow Akron. Earlier this year, we did a market value analysis. What we found is about 81% of the population that works in Akron does not live in the city. That's a huge opportunity for us. People tell me a lot of times, how are you going to grow? Where are these people going to come from? I say within an hour of our downtown, there are 4 million people. We're the 15th largest, to Matt's point, region in the United States. This is not a small place. So a lot of it Our challenge in Akron, I think it's similar in Cleveland, is our very low cost of real estate is a blessing and it's sometimes a curse, which people don't think about because it is very hard to incentivize the private sector to build new housing when you have price points that we typically experience, even more to renovate housing. You know, if you buy a house for $20,000, put $80,000 into it and sell it for $40,000, I'm not a financial whiz, but that's not a very good return on investment. So how do we change that? One of the big things that Mayor Horgan launched, and we took cues from Cleveland on this, is citywide 15-year 100% residential property tax abatement, which we passed through council in July, and we think that's going to be a real game changer for us.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to build a house, you know that you're hoping that the house is going to be there for at least 100 years, right? And so if you're abating that tax for 15 years to lure to somebody to come in, that will be paying taxes back to that city, that region, well in excess of that. Ron, I know you moved to Cleveland about 15 years ago to lead the Cleveland Foundation as president and CEO. What are some of the lessons learned over that period of time with regards to economic development and how we can be more strategic and intentional around that issue?
Yeah, well, I think one of the big lessons learned is that we used to not be as effective as we are now in workforce development. So we used to train a lot of people for jobs that didn't exist. Now what we realized is that we really have to go to the companies and say, you help us design the workforce programs and commit to hiring the people that go through these programs. The Cleveland Foundation actually funds, a lot of programs. Like we started something called New Bridge, which has 3 different training programs, training people for the hospitals here, but we got the hospitals to help us design the programs and commit to hiring the people that come out of it. We've also started in the high schools. We helped to start 5 new career technical education high schools. So we actually sent some of our employees to Europe to study what they do there. And those high schools now have apprenticeship programs. We have a big pilot through Magnet and WireNet with 5 giant companies in this area. And so kids are learning how to, in school, about computer science and then learning how to work CAD/CAM machines in factories. So these are apprenticeship jobs. And the companies have said that, we'll hire all the kids you can produce. One company said we could hire 30 people a month for the next 3 years and not have enough workers. There is still a lot of manufacturing in this area. The problem has been getting, people who want to work in those factories, believe it or not. So we have a good problem. A lot of cities, they just don't have jobs. We have 1,200 IT jobs in the city of Cleveland. And that's why now every 8th grader will get computer science education so that we can grow our own workforce. It's great for the people who need jobs. It's even better for the companies that are desperately looking for workers.
So let's stay on that theme. Natoya, what are some of the challenges you see in terms of job access and pathways to these types of opportunities?
In terms of access, transportation is the biggest impediment, I would say. We're working on something called the Opportunity Corridor here in Cleveland, Ohio. It's 330 million, 3 miles. It will connect 2 major thoroughways to what is our highest wealth neighborhood, if you will, University Circle, and it's going through an area that's never really been developed. And the question becomes, how do you connect the people that live along where the corridor will be, which are the lowest resourced homes and families in our community, to those opportunities? So we began having conversations about who will we attract from an economic development perspective as employers along the corridor so that we can have access, so that the people that live in and around those communities have access to those employers. Why is that important? We completed a study about 18 months or so ago that indicated there's a 90-minute bus ride to the employer, to the majority of employers that the people that live in these neighborhoods transport to. Why is that? Because major employers have began to move to the outskirts, right? To the exurbs, to the suburbs further away, and the buses take about 90 minutes. So if you're a mom, and I'm a mom, and I only have one, but if I'm a mom with 2 kids and I have to catch a bus 90 minutes and get my kids to school, that's a problem. That means myself and my kids are up maybe 3.5 hours before I have to be at work so I can transport. So it becomes critically important that we have transportation access. Transportation, whether it's bike, train, bus line, and cars, we need to be multimodal so we can get to the employers. The point that Ron indicated, demand-driven workforce is critical. It is absolutely fundamental that we, in working with the schools, right, that we direct our children while they're in schools to the jobs of opportunity that will be here for them. It's not enough to train and educate them for jobs that aren't here. That means we'll get to brain drain. We want to get to brain gain, so we want to make sure that those that live here have opportunity for employment that is here so that our community can thrive. That's what all this is about, and that's why place-based strategies, demand-driven workforce, really talking to the employers, understanding what they need, talking to public education, charter education, community college education, and working with the universities so that we can train and prepare a ready pool of workforce so that they can tap into that, we can have brain gain here, and they can live at an economic status that they want to.
So Jason, as the planning director for planning and urban development in the city of Akron, I know you've been reassessing your economic development strategy in the city. Tell us a little bit about what is changing and how this will help provide an opportunity at the neighborhood level.
So I would say there are two big changes that are kind of underway right now. Akron traditionally for a long time, I think like a lot of cities in our part of the country, at one time we made half of the tires on the face of the earth. And we went through that decline of the rubber and tire industry. The economic development strategy, I think, still was largely how do we attract big companies back to Akron. That had some successes, but it is a challenge. It's kind of a strategy where you're constantly swinging for the fence and trying to hit home runs. And I think, to use the baseball analogy, we're kind of shifting to trying to hit singles. How do we grow local business? How do we build entrepreneurship within the community? I think the second thing, it's kind of the flip side of the challenge that Natoya mentioned, is not only are those jobs far from a lot of the people who need them most, I think one of the strategies we're really working on is how do we get those jobs back to the people that need them so they don't even have to be on a bus, or if they're on a bus, it's 10 minutes like it used to be, or a walk. And that part is kind of some of the things I was talking about earlier with growing the city's population. We adopted a goal of getting back to 250,000 people by 2050. I think a lot of people think that's crazy. I like those kind of goals when people think it's crazy because I think it gives us a challenge. But we really believe that residential redevelopment of the city and placemaking is economic development, because I think if you look at the numbers, what you'll find is a lot of the jobs that left the city, yes, the tire and rubber jobs were really well paying, but all those other support jobs in neighborhoods, grocery stores, barbershops, restaurants, all those things that employ people at the local level that 50 or 60 years ago, even if you were poor, you probably had a job nearby you could walk to. Now, as Natoya said, you have this horrible trip on a bus really far to the suburbs. It's just not sustainable. So I think also bringing wealth back into the city, and the median household income in the city of Akron is $34,000. How do the poverty rate's 25%. How do we bring middle class people back into the city, but with an eye toward equity and making sure that we're revitalizing neighborhoods without displacing people? And I think it's a good challenge to have, and I know it's one that cities throughout Ohio and this part of the country, we all know this world well.
Ron, as we wind up this session, tell us a little bit about what the foundation is doing and what your approach is with the role around in technology, around economic mobility and inclusion.
Yeah. Well, I got here about 15 years ago, and at the time it was a very different city. Euclid Avenue was mostly boarded up, and the Plain Dealer was running a series called The Quiet Crisis, which was talking about the not so successful decline of Cleveland. And what it occurred to me, having come from industry and having run the CIA's venture capital fund before I got here, it seemed clear what had happened. We stopped innovating, and we had really totally missed the IT revolution, the first 3 waves of it. And we just can't afford to miss the next wave, the Internet of Everything, artificial intelligence wave. And so, as I said before, we started funding, Jumpstart, founding funder Jumpstart, and other high-tech economic intermediaries. But the other thing that we're trying very hard to do is to bring back our universities. Case Western Reserve University, it was actually Case Institute of Technology in 1950, was the #1 IT school college in the country. It outranked MIT and Caltech. And, in recent years, of course, it hasn't, it's probably around 45th. But it's got great potential. And we're doing everything we can with lots of grants to Case to bring them back. Recently, we gave a grant to Case and CSU to work together. We have to be a top 10 university in IT again, and the foundation will do everything it can to make that happen. We just can't miss the next wave. We're also have been pushing for 12 years now LEEDCO, which is an attempt to make Cleveland the wind turbine manufacturing center for offshore wind for the country. And we're sort of on the 1-yard line with that project. We won a $51 million really competitive competition with the Department of Energy. We've done our 10 years of bird studies and bat studies and soil samples, and so we're just trying to sell the power now. We probably got 2/3 of it sold, and we really have to be at the forefront of new industries. And as I said before, one of the things we're doing is starting with young kids and making sure at the K through 12 and college level we have all the right courses, and whether it's prison reentry or other folks that just have had a rough employment history, giving them the IT skills they need to have jobs. But a lot of it really has to start with making us in every way a competitive city digitally. And I think that's happening. I think we're starting to attract a lot of young people back into the core city who do have those skills and can put them to use here.
So here's my challenge to each and every one of you in this room. What are you doing in your respective sector about being intentional with what you do to make sure that we can build more economic mobility and opportunity for the peoples who live in our community? All of you, please join me in welcoming our panelists for this morning's session.
Thank you so much. So we're going to take one thread from that discussion, which is this digital dimension, and pull it out a little bit and see where it leads us. We thought we should go to New America, the think tank based in Washington, D.C., and we did this we did it in 2014 when we went to Detroit, where we asked the question, how can a city like Detroit make itself more resilient facing the future?